Now, EFS is designed for a specific use case. If you have a single file that you need to keep from prying eyes, you can encrypt that file. And as we've already seen, certain elements of IT, even those with elevated privileges, will in many cases not be able to access that file. But EFS only does files that are already on the disk. What happens if you want to actually encrypt the entire disk? You can think of different use cases for why this would be necessary. To encrypt an entire disk would protect a would-be attacker from stealing a machine and then accessing content. Encrypting the entire disk would prevent that person from maybe gathering enough information to get a feel for the information that would otherwise be protected by digging through temporary files or by digging through the recycle bin or any of the other places where data tends to hang out in the Windows operating system. And so for that purpose, it can be useful for us to protect ourselves from that person stealing information by just simply encrypting the entire disk all at once. In order to do this, we have a couple of things we have to accomplish here. And we also have to recognize that doing so is going to add a little bit of pain to the user's experience with that operating system. Because in order for them to decrypt that disk, to even use it, they'll have to enter in some kind of password or plug in a USB key with the appropriate file on it to decrypt the machine every time they power on. Now here we are back on my desktop, and I'm again logged on as my account, the G Shields account. And what I want to show you is that your users can actually go through and enable BitLocker if they want on their machines, in some cases without really any extra effort on your part. If we come here and we attempt to go to BitLocker, we can launch the Managed BitLocker Wizard here, which is a location where you can turn BitLocker on for the variety of machines that use Windows 8 or 8.1. The problem, however, is in our little VMware workstation environment that we're dealing with here, we don't actually have a machine that can use BitLocker. But what I mean by use BitLocker is use the most secure form of BitLocker, which involves what is called a Trusted Platform Module chip, an actual piece of silicon that sits on that machine and contains all of the bootstrapping bits that are necessary to decrypt and encrypt the drive. Now, the good thing is that if you don't have machines, like in our little VMware workstation environment here, that have that trusted platform module, that TPM chip on them, well, there are ways in which you can get around that by enabling some of the less secure methods, the password-oriented methods that BitLocker can use. Now let's actually go through the process of configuring this machine to support BitLocker. I want to show you one of the little hacks that you'll have to incorporate if you want to use BitLocker on a machine that doesn't have that TPM chip. I'm going to launch a gpedit.msc, which brings me to the local group policy editor for this computer. I don't want to do this in group policy because I don't want to deploy it everywhere just yet. Let's assume that this is a machine that is either separated from the domain or is in a work group for one reason or another. Now here in the local group policy editor is a location that I want to take you to under computer configuration, under administrative templates and Windows components down here, and then BitLocker Drive Encryption here. We'll spend more time talking about the group policy items that you see here. Most of these are found also in group policy, but for now I just want to show you one specific setting that's important for at least getting ourselves started. Let's choose here under Operating System Drives the policy setting called Require Additional Authentication at Startup. It's here where we can go about enabling this policy and then allowing BitLocker without a compatible TPM chip to use either a startup key, which is a file that's typically on a USB hard drive, a little thumb drive, or a password that you would use every time you power on the machine. This checkbox is necessary to allow us to then retry managing BitLocker and then setting this up to use a password. Let me go ahead and choose the OK button here and minimize this. And let me just bring back up the BitLocker screen here so that we can take a look at how this would be enabled now that we've sort of hacked the settings here in the local group policy. I will choose here to turn on BitLocker, and now you can see that we are checking the PC's configuration, and we're now able to configure BitLocker with either that USB flash drive or with a password. Now remember, anytime you do this, particularly in the case where it's being done without any kind of Active Directory assistance or group policy assistance, where it's not centrally managed, if you should lose that USB flash drive, or if you should forget the password, you will have completely lost all the information on this disk. There is no way to recover this information without that USB flash drive or without that password. And arguably, you wouldn't want there to be a way to recover that without having either of those, because the would-be attacker could potentially use that vector to decrypt the drive. In my case, I'll choose to enter a password here, and I'll punch in my password and make sure I punch it correctly in both cases. Then choose Next. And it's here where we can choose how we want to back up the recovery key. Again, just like before, a really great idea for you to go about saving it to a file or saving it to another flash drive so you have a backup of your recovery key. Also very important, if you do want to use that USB flash drive, it's a great idea not to put the flash drive in the same case or the same backpack as the laptop, because that kind of gets around the whole reason for having these two things separate. In our case, let's save that key to a file here, which needs to be on a location that is not an encrypted drive. In fact, somewhat humorously, if you attempt to save it over here to the desktop, you'll get an error message that says this location cannot be used. This is a protectionary measure to protect yourself against the key being on the drive you just encrypted. Let me just store that here instead in the location dc:/key.txt. So I've got a copy of that now in that remote location. This now allows me to click the Next button to choose how much of my drive I want to encrypt. In the production world, in a real implementation here, you typically would encrypt the entire drive. Now that takes a really long time because every piece of space on the drive needs to be encrypted. In our case, we'll choose to encrypt the used disk space only, just to reduce the amount of time we have to wait for this process to complete. If I choose Next here, I can choose whether to select or deselect whether the BitLocker will run the system check. Generally a good idea to accomplish this. I'm not going to, just simply because I know it will work. And then finally click the last button here to start encrypting the drive. Now I'm not going to click this because the process to encrypt this drive takes an exceedingly long period of time, and I actually need this desktop for future courses in this learning path. But this gives you an idea of exactly what the steps are on a specific machine, on a work group, or away from the domain, how you could go about configuring BitLocker encryption.